So I just want to thank you for coming on tonight. This is Jennifer Brody. She is an award-winning presenter, author, film, and television producer. And I'm going to let her go ahead and start up, and hopefully you guys enjoy the evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
All right. Hi, Ariana. Hi, Gladys. Thanks for joining. So we're going to be talking about introductory to writing exercises tonight, but to let you know a little bit about myself, and feel free if you want to turn on your cameras or participate, no pressure. I'll open the chat as well if you guys have questions. I am the author of, I guess, going on 11 books. I just finished my 11th novel. I am the author of the 13th Continuum Trilogy, which is a YA sci-fi but crossover series with multiple points of view. All 3 books are out. I also write graphic novels. I have 2 out. One is called Spectre Deep 6 and the other 200. Both are science fiction. Spectre Deep 6 just got nominated for a Stoker Award, so we're pretty excited. And all of my stuff is being packaged for television and film, which is exciting. So we'll see, which is part of what I do. And then I'm also the author under the pen name Vera Strange of the Disney Chill series, which is basically Goosebumps meets Disney with Disney villains. So they are middle grade. They're for 8 to 12-year-old readers, although I will say there's quite a lot of adult fans who read them, especially Disney fans love them. And I just finished the 6th book in that series, which is Maleficent. And my Hades book, which is the 5th in the series, comes out in August. So I will be doing some events and things coming up. I'm excited to actually have my first in-person signings in over, I want to say, 1.5 years, almost 2 years coming up. Everything's been virtual, of course, with the craziness of this year. But it is one thing that brought me back to teaching. I had sort of, with all the work I had going on and book deadlines, I had kind of taken a break from teaching writing workshops. And when COVID hit, there was a pretty high demand with a lot of folks stuck at home, but looking for something productive to do with their time. And a lot of people have always wanted to write or aspired to write and maybe put it on hold because of work or other life demands, as happens. And I think with the extra time at home, there was just a lot of people wanting to get back into writing or start learning some basics or jumpstart that process. So I agreed to come back and did a bunch of writing workshops for the Writing Pad, which is an award-winning school here in Los Angeles. And I even did some tween and teen workshops because a lot of kids stuck at home. Also, parents were looking for ways to enrich them or give them extra boost to what was going on. So it's been really rewarding, but I love teaching, and I love teaching writing. And one of the reasons I love it is when I first started, I'm very self-taught. I never went to school, never took a writing class. I taught myself how to write novels. I'm just a huge reader. My background was in Hollywood. I started out working in the trenches. First movie I ever worked on was Donnie Darko. I did an internship on the Disney lot, and then I went on to work at New Line, and my boss made Lord of the Rings and a lot of other big films. And I sort of came to writing through storytelling, but growing up, I was a huge reader, was always at the library, read through every section of books that I could get my hands on. And I like to credit that with how I came to be a writer. I think good readers make good writers. Which is part of why I love doing events and speaking and hanging out at libraries. It's a really great gateway to writing. So I'm very self-taught, but when we start learning to write, we make a lot of mistakes, as we do with anything. It's a craft. They always say, what do they say? It takes 10,000 hours to master anything. But I teach to try to help give good tips and good craft tools to help you avoid some of the mistakes that I made when I was first coming to writing, because there are things that we fall into, and there are good craft tools and tips that can help you, I guess, get better faster is the best way to think about it. With writing, there is the creative element, the spark, but if you're taking a workshop or if you're interested in writing, you probably already have that. And then writing is a craft as well. It's 2 things. It's an art form, but it's a craft. And that means that there are things you can learn. There are concrete tips. There are ways to get better. And there are things that you can learn and that will help you become a really strong writer. And I like to teach to talk a lot about that. So the biggest thing when we first come to writing is character and voice. And that's what we're going to talk about mostly today. The biggest thing with writing in the beginning, and this is the first big pillar of writing, is absolutely character and voice. The other big thing, which when I teach for Writing Pad, I spend a whole lesson on this, is structure. And we're not going to get into that a lot today, but there is a way to structure a story. So to begin, we're going to talk mostly about character and voice because that's the first big pillar of where we begin writing. So character and voice are the core of story. It's important to understand that we read for character. Paying attention to your reading habits or to other people's reading habits will help you understand what it is that we like as readers, and that helps us understand what we need to do, what our job is as a writer. So it's most important to understand we read for character. It doesn't matter what the book is about. It doesn't matter what genre, what category. It could be a children's chapter book. It could be a middle grade story like Harry Potter or my Disney Chill series. It could be an award-winning novel like Toni Morrison's Beloved or Cormac McCarthy's The Road. It's important to understand that we read for character. That's what draws us in. If you've ever picked up a book and on the surface you're like, well, I'm not interested in what this topic is at all, right? One of my favorite books of all time is Ken Follett's The Pillars of the Earth. It's now spawned a trilogy and a prequel. It's historical fiction set in the Middle Ages. It's about a guy who wants to build a cathedral. I do not care about cathedrals. I am not interested in them. There are people who are. That isn't me. When I go abroad and I like to travel, I don't want to do the cathedral tour. I like to eat. I like to go to art museums. So when my dad first told me, please read this book, it's amazing, I was like, oh, it sounds like the most boring book in existence. Want to know what? I couldn't put it down. Right? I was carrying this giant 1,000-page historical fiction epic around. And because of the character and because I got so invested in the characters and what they care about, therefore I came to care about something like a cathedral. You can even think about it with regards to television shows, right? Like The Queen's Gambit was one of my favorite shows from this year on Netflix. It's about a girl in the 50s who plays chess. Again, sounds kind of not that gripping, but the show sucks you in and you get so invested. It is based on a novel and her character and what she cares about. Therefore, we come to care about the chess and the chess matches. So we read for character and we care about things when the character cares about things and when they're important to them. So one of the first big choices we make when we start writing anything from a short story to a novel to anything in existence is whose story is this, right? Whose story do we want to tell? There are so many ways to tell the exact same story. But what matters, and you're the author of this work, whose story is it that you want to tell? To understand this, you can think about how many different stories there are, even set in the same time period, even about the same event. Think about it. How many books, stories, television shows are there about World War II, for example? Right? I feel like every year there's a new one. There's a new movie, there's a new show, there's a new book. But whose story do you want to tell? What interests you about this? And so each of these will be unique based on the point of view of the story. And the point of view determines everything about what you're writing. And a book, could come out and I might think, oh, I've seen so much of this. And then Anthony Dewar writes All the Light We Cannot See, which is, I know Tony a little bit, but it's one of my favorite books last many years, went on to win the Pulitzer Prize. And it is about World War II, but he took it and framed it and created this whole new story that's amazing. But how many books are there about young star-crossed lovers, right? How many times do we retell Romeo and Juliet or Cinderella, which are classic archetypes of stories? An archetype is a classic story. This is from the Joseph Campbell Myths and Mythology stuff, who he went back and broke down classic stories from Greek plays, Greek mythology, all the way up to Shakespeare and beyond. And they create modern archetypes of stories. But we can take and retell the story. What makes it unique is what are the characters, whose point of view are we choosing, and what are we writing? So that's character. And then voice determines the strength of writing. If you ever heard someone say, oh, this writer has great voice, the story has great voice, it's pretty much the first thing any reader, agent, publisher will look for is voice. When Disney hired me to write, they hired me because they said I wrote great middle grade voice. And we need to understand, and we'll go through what voice is. This is the thing that sucks you in. If you've ever been in a bookstore and picked up a book or a library and read a couple pages and then made a decision, do I want to read this book? Well, what were you deciding based on? Nothing had even happened in the story yet. You were deciding based on the voice of the story, right? Did it suck you in? And conversely, you've probably picked up a book and you didn't really get into it, and maybe you put it back on the shelf. Well, it didn't work for you. The voice didn't draw you into the story, because in the beginning, all we have is character and voice. Nothing big usually ever happens in a book until a little bit into it. So, what is voice in novel, and how is it different than character? The term voice in fiction has two very different meanings. So, voice can be the author's style, and that's the quality that makes his or her or them's writing unique, and which conveys the author's attitude, personality. This is why, if you've read through a certain author's work, through a whole canon of their work, and these tend to be authors that have published many books. Some of my favorites are Kurt Vonnegut, for example, or Toni Morrison, Haruki Murakami, who's a Japanese author that I absolutely adore, Cormac McCarthy. If we took excerpts blindly from their work and put them up like a police lineup, we could probably pick out which author wrote which excerpt, right? Because their voice and style is so unique. And each writer should strive to have their own voice, their own unique style of writing. We're not trying to copy anyone else. I always say it this way: there's only one Toni Morrison. There will only ever be one. Same with Cormac, same with Haruki Murakami. But you can't be them. They are them and they write as them. You need to work to cultivate your own voice. Okay, or voice can be the characteristic speech and thought pattern of the narrator of a work or the character if we're in first person. So voice is really what distinguishes good writing from just mediocre writing. And it's the first thing, as I mentioned, a reader looks for when they're picking up a book. This is why we can read a couple pages of something and tell how strong the writing is. We're looking at the voice, the style of it, the style of the writing, and the characteristic speech patterns of the writer. And the big key to writing fiction is, once we've chosen a character and a point of view to write in, is to filter everything through the point of view of the character. We're always filtering through the character's point of view. This isn't us writing a scientific paper or a Wikipedia encyclopedic entry about this. We are filtering very heavily through the perspective of the narrator or the character in the work of fiction. And that's what makes it interesting. It's not what happened, it's this character's perspective of what happened, right? And so the character is going to kind of filter everything for us and tell us their version of the story. Because remember, there are so many different versions of the same story. And in fact, if you went into a story and retold the same thing from a supporting character's point of view, the villain's point of view, you would probably get a totally different story and a totally different perspective of the same thing. That's because all characters have different points of view. This is even why, if you have really great characters set into a work, and this is something I do, you can even take the villain, right, and then retell the whole story from the villain's point of view. Look at Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty, right? How many movies do we have of her now? How many books do we have? I just wrote her into a book. She's a fantastic character. And if we look at the films, or we look at Serena Valentino's, she writes a Disney villain series. I love Serena. She's a friend of mine now. Her book, you'll get a very different perspective of the events of Sleeping Beauty than you did from the original film, which was more the protagonist, the princess's point of view. So in the beginning of writing, point of view is your first really big choice you're going to make. And that comes back to, whose story are we telling? And then how are we choosing to tell this story? And in the beginning of writing, you really have the choice between writing in first person and third person largely. Most fiction exists in one of these two. And you've probably read works in both of these. First person is that I narrator. I did this, I went there. Third person is Harry went to the story. Harry did this. And those are really what almost all fiction is written between these two. Although I always say you can find examples of second person in literature, but they're pretty rare. I always like to point it out just to say, hey, this exists. You're probably not going to do it, but be aware of it. It is a tool. I always think of these things as tools that you can have in your writer's toolbox. There isn't really a right or wrong answer necessarily, because at the end of the day, this is an art form. But I like writers to make conscious choices about what they're writing and to select the best tool to tell the story they want to tell. So second person is like, you did this, you went there, you went to the store. This you're going to run into more in experimental short fiction, but you might see it. Or there's one category book that does this a lot, which is Choose Your Own Adventure. If you remember those from when you were a kid, go to page 62 and then you die a horrible death and then you go back and you try a different path. But the reason is because it's trying to put you into the character and you into the story. So it'll be you arrived at a fork in the road. You did this. So we say asterisks on second person. A lot of video games use second person as well. Same idea because it's talking to you as the character and trying to put you into the adventure. But there is a book I really loved that came out a couple of years ago, which is N.K. Jamison's The Fifth Season. It is the first in a sci-fi trilogy. It's freaking amazing. And the book has 3 points of view, but one is in second person. So I always like to say, you'll never see this, and then somebody does it. I like to say, though, that is only one of 3 points of view. I don't know about a whole novel in second person, although someone could prove me wrong. That book did win the Hugo Award. She's the first Black woman to win a Hugo Award, and she's the first author to win 3 back to back to back for all 3 in this trilogy, and it is really amazing. She's a phenomenal writer. So my point in saying that is that for any example I talk about today, you might say, hey, here's someone who broke the rules or did something different and it worked. I just always like to say, remember, these are outliers. They're not usually the 99.9%, but also like painters or like any artists, we say Picasso didn't start deconstructing form. He learned classical painting first. He learned the foundational elements of painting, and then he started to reinvent the form. So I always say it's a good thing with writing. It's good to learn the basics. It's good to master them, learn how to do them. And if you wish, and you do not have to do this, if you wish to get experimental, you can, but it's good to master it first before you start deconstructing. Writing a novel or even a short story can feel like pushing a boulder up a mountain, right? It can feel really hard, especially in the beginning. And I always say the more extra things you put onto yourself, multiple points of view, experimental voice or structure, the taller the mountain got that you have to climb. It doesn't mean you can't climb it. It's just that you made your job a lot harder. And in the beginning, when we're still just trying to tackle something like voice, like character, like just classic story structure, that can be a lot to take on. So it's just worth thinking about. So it's not that you can't do it. And I would never want to discourage anyone from doing something they really, really aspire to do. It just means that your work is a lot harder. That's all. So that brings us back to our choices of deciding between first person and third person. What are the differences between them? What are the pros and cons? And I think it's worth knowing. And again, there are no wrong answers. These are just tools in your toolbox, and you want to select the right tool for the story you want to tell. I have written whole series in third person. I have written in first. Both are really fun, and both have different strengths and weaknesses depending on what kind of story you want to tell. And I enjoy them both. So as discussed, first person, you're going to run into a lot. First person narratives are all over the place. There are certain categories and genres that exist mostly in first person. The most obvious one being memoir, right? Which is obviously not fiction, it's narrative nonfiction, but for obvious reasons, memoir is always almost written by the author as themselves. Therefore, we're going to be in first person. Now, the pros of first person, and memoir speaks to this, is that you get to delve super deep into one character's thoughts, feelings, their internal. And novel and short story, unlike other types of fiction, screenplay, graphic novel even, necessitates a big internal layer that these others don't need. That means, how does character think and feel about what's happening? We're constantly revisiting that internal layer in fiction. So sometimes if you're struggling to have strong voice on the page, first person is a great choice, especially when you're first learning to develop strong voice. Why? Because it forces you to write in voice. It forces you into the character's thoughts and feelings. You have no choice but to write in their voice. Therefore, sometimes it can make the voice of the piece stronger. As mentioned, first person is dominant in certain arenas. Actually, the 2 best-selling genres / categories of writing, they sell the most books of all, are most often in first person. These are also the arenas that are written most by women. They get the least respect from the New York Times bestseller list. They get the least respect from the awards committees. Shocking. But we also sell the most books of all writers. And those 2 are romance. Romance is by far the best selling, and I'm sure you have these in your library. I'm sure they're quite popular. You probably see
they are.
Yeah, and readers who love these, they're like addicts, right? They consume them in large quantities, one after another. I have a neighbor here. She's a adorable. I always see her at the hot tub and she always has her nose in one of these and she loves them. They bring her great joy. I have friends that write these. The fans are really committed and dedicated. So romance is most often in first person. Why? Because the protagonist / main character is a cipher for the reader, right? The idea of romance is that you get that experience of what romance, right? Falling in love. What is it like? What is this adventure like? So that's one reason it's in first person most often. And of course, there are exceptions. And the other reason is what? It's all about the feelings. I always say romance is all about the feels. It's all about that super internal experience, right? And so first person lets you delve very deeply into a character and what it feels like to meet someone and to fall in love. Of course, romance has a classic structure, which is what? When characters meet each other, they don't like each other, right? Why? Because it'd be really boring to read otherwise. Like we read for drama, we read for conflict. I always say it's like when you're sitting in a restaurant and there's like, let's say there's a couple next to you on a romantic date. I love you. No, I love you more. No, I love you more. You're like, oh, it's the most boring thing I've ever heard. And then across the room, there's another couple who's having some drag down fight over something. Guess who you're riveted and eavesdropping on? The couple having the fight. It's like reality TV. We read for conflict. We love it. So in romance, classic romance structure, characters meet, they really hate each other usually in the beginning. Most often for misunderstanding, right? A misunderstood reason. And then over the course of the story, they're forced together, typically in the inciting incident. It can even be something like a forced marriage. Welcome to your Outlander, Diana Gabaldon. Love Outlander. And then over the course of the story, they fall in love by the end, right? But a lot of obstacles and conflict to overcome along the way. But as mentioned, this is most often in first person. The other category most often in first person is young adult and middle grade often. Why? Young adult literature, by default, anytime you're writing it, reading, it's a coming of age story. They're all coming of age stories. It doesn't matter where they take place. It doesn't matter what it's about. Typically, it could be in outer space, could be in a fantasy world, could be in a contemporary high school. They're always coming of age stories, right? No matter what. And the difference between an adult coming of age story, because there are those, right? And a YA book, this is the experience of what it's like to be in high school right now. We have no narrative distance. We have no ability to look back, oh, when I was in high school, it was like that. This is what it's like to be in high school right now. We're in it, we're in it, we're in it. And the categories middle grade and young adult, the protagonist of stories corresponds to the age of the reader. Middle grade is 8 to 12-year-olds, and then YA is 12 to 18 or 12 and up. Right. That doesn't mean adults don't read them. They do. They read them hugely. 50% of YA readers are actually adult readers. I know this. I have a series. My middle grade books are read very widely by adults. I think I got a tweet last week. Congratulations, you scared a 38-year-old man with my middle grade book. That said, typically the reader is relating, again, a cipher for the character because the target age range for these books is the same age as the character. Therefore, that I experience often helps transport them into the story. The other thing is that these areas of writing, because they're coming of age, everything is so huge, right? It's so extra. You know, first kiss, first dance, first time you drive a car, first. And so the emotions behind that are very amplified. So first person allows us to get very deeply into that internal experience. That said, of course, we're going to find third person in these, especially as we move into young adult sci-fi, fantasy, historical fiction, which I categorize as the epic genres. We're going to run into a little more third person, which we'll talk about why in a minute. You'll still see some first person. Hunger Games, for example, which is sci-fi, is first person. Twilight, which is fantasy, is first person. So we're going to still see a lot of first person, even in the epic genres, for the reasons I just discussed. But we might run into a little more third person here and there. But as mentioned, coming of age is a time of intensified emotion, and first person often is a great choice to explore that very deeply. Okay. The cons, the downsides of writing in first person. All right. You better really like your character because you're going to be getting real cozy with them for a long time. Of course, when we move into novel, even longer. So if you don't like being in their head, you're going to hate yourself and hate your life. So you better really like being in this character's head because you're going to be there a lot and you're going to be there for a long time. So the cons can be that you're locked into one single character. Anything they don't think, feel, know isn't on the page. Now, that can also be a plus depending on the story you want to tell. But that can be a real downside too, depending. You're also forced to use language that your character would employ. That means all that fancy stuff that you want to write, those big words maybe that you learned in school. Well, if you're writing a high school student, she's not going to use that kind of language most likely to describe her high school. Right? You got to use the language that that teen character would employ. Of course, could you construct a character who is a total, reader who studies the dictionary and uses big fancy words? Of course, you can create that character. But for the most part, most teenagers aren't going to use fancy literary language to describe what their everyday life at high school is like. So the upside is good voice. The downside can be you can't use fancy literary language if you so aspire to do so. You're stuck using language the character would employ. The other thing is it can get a little bit limiting when we move into the epic genres. And as mentioned, the epic genres are sci-fi, fantasy, and I actually push historical fiction into this. I believe that writing historical fiction is actually the same as writing sci-fi and fantasy. You're just relying slightly more heavily on research, but not necessarily. In my sci-fi, I use a tremendous amount of historical allegory, which means I'll look at different time periods and import something that happened in history into a sci-fi context. But it's kind of the same. You have to do a lot of world building and you have to tell the reader kind of everything about it. The further we abstract from the here and now, the more work we have to do with all of that world building stuff. And this is something I teach about a lot. Therefore, third person is sometimes a better choice because it gives us more leeway to describe the world and to set up the world. Sometimes first person can get limiting, especially as we expand in series. And obviously this is a great success story, but something like Hunger Games is a great example, which is a first person sci-fi story. It was a whole series of films. But as the book series progressed, it kind of started to do this. And the third book is pretty weak in the series. And if you don't believe me, just read the reviews on Amazon or anywhere. And these are fans of the series. And that's because as things start to want to grow, the books remained locked in Katniss's point of view, her first person point of view, and they couldn't really expand the way we needed to see the scope of what was going on in the world. And this is especially true as we progress through series. The films can break that and work a little better. And just to point it out, I'm pretty sure the author realizes that because the prequel to Hunger Games just dropped, and guess what? It's in third person, not first. And I have a feeling, yes.
Just quick question. So as like a person who's starting to write something like
Mhm.
that, and you don't really know,
Mhm.
you start as a first person and you don't really know, and you start getting into your writing and start progressing past the first novel. Is it just kind of like a learning experience where you learn that type of thing?
I think so. I mean, I think in the case, I know specifically what happened with Hunger Games to a couple of different levels. My first editor at Disney was the editor that worked on Hunger Games at Scholastic. And she had written a series before, which was a middle grade series, but they didn't expect Hunger Games to be a huge hit. In fact, they had no idea what they had on their hands. And so she thought she was just writing one book. She wasn't thinking beyond. And some of the problems of the series, I think, also have to do with the fact that she hadn't thought out a full arc for it once. And of course, once it's a huge runaway hit, the publisher wants more books. But I like Catching Fire. That's the second one, but she really just repeated the plot of the first. Like if you were to put it up on a board, that's just something we do in Hollywood, beat by beat by beat, Catching Fire and Hunger Games are the same book. They're the exact same book. So the third book, she tried to do something different, but she was trapped. And she made a couple choices that I think weren't the smartest. I also heard she got really obsessed with the script for the movie and took her eye off the ball in the book, which is unfortunate.
Oh, and that was Mockingjay, right?
Yeah, and I had pre-ordered it. And trust me, I'm not a hater. I am a fan typically of things that I like. And I was very disappointed because I was super excited and I thought there was so much potential, and it just didn't pull off. And I think it's always sad when a series doesn't because you'll lose a lot of fans and it won't stand that test of time. This is the Game of Thrones problem, right? He's never going to finish that series. The show ended badly. People are going to forget it versus Lord of the Rings, right? The Lord of the Rings, perfect trilogy, perfectly structured, phenomenal films, or Harry Potter. The seventh book of Harry Potter is so strong. And I can't believe she could pull it off. I know she's been in trouble on Twitter and this and that, but the seventh Harry Potter book is fantastic. And I think you can see with the growth of the fan base and the growth of the world that series, I do believe, will stand a test of time. But I think it really matters how you finish. Twilight's another example, although I like Twilight better than most for obvious reasons. She wrote herself into a corner by the fourth book. the main character is incapacitated and she tries to switch into Jacob's point of view, one of the other characters, and it doesn't work because she wrote herself into a corner with that first person and she didn't know what to do. So yeah, I think to some extent it can be a learning curve. With Twilight, Stephenie Meyer was a brand new writer. She didn't even expect Twilight to get published, let alone to be a phenomenon. I do credit her more than anyone with the explosion of young adult literature. And I went to see her speak like 2 years ago for the anniversary of Twilight, and it was really interesting to hear her talk. I do really like her. I am reading the Edward retelling of Twilight right now.
Okay.
And it's super fun. And I like that she did that. So she rewrote Twilight from Edward's point of view, which is also kind of cool. She does some cool stuff. You know, I have mixed thoughts on her like love-hate relationship with elements of Twilight. But yeah, I think to some degree it's a learning curve, but that's part of why I like to talk about this. I'm like, if you are writing something that is a little bit more epic, even if you don't know if it's going to even become a full novel, if it could become something, it's just worth taking into consideration that how you set the tone from the beginning will kind of set something for the series. And it's very hard once it's set to change anything. So if you're writing just a contemporary, let's say a contemporary YA love story set in high school, you probably don't need to worry about some of these things we're talking about. You're probably totally fine being in first person. If you are thinking about writing something more like what I write, which is like, you know, Star Wars-y, you know, big fantasy, big sci-fi, or big historical fiction, and we're going to talk about third person, it might be a good decision to think about using that instead. And one thing you can do also when you're beginning is to try drafting a little bit in first and draft a little bit in third person and see which is stronger. Which do you like writing better? Which is coming out better? I am currently revising my next big sci-fi, and it is a big space opera, but it is in first person. It's 2 points of view in first person. I tried to write it in third, and I thought that's what I would write it in because my Continuum Trilogy is a multiple point of view third person sci-fi, but it wasn't working and it wasn't working. And that's because this new book I'm writing is at the core, it's a romance. It is 2 points of view, a boy and a girl, and it involves one going off to space to join Space Force and one going to college in communication. And at the core of it, I needed that first person to really go deeply into the love story and the relationship, because the core of the book has to do with the relationship between these two characters. And so it actually works better in first person, which is not something I knew before. I was just trying and it wasn't quite working how I wanted until I switched it. So sometimes the story tells you what it needs as much as you think you're going to tell the story what it needs, which is why it's good to know about all these different options. The other things with first person, something it's actually really great for, is one of my favorite reasons to write in first person is unreliable narrator. Unreliable narrator is one of my favorite things in all of literature. And I always say this, to some degree, all characters are unreliable, right? Even if you're a good, well-intentioned person, but if multiple people witness the same thing, let's say a car accident, everyone's going to have a different perspective. Or let's say there's a fight in your family, everyone's probably going to have a different perspective, not because they're trying to intentionally deceive, just because we all have different perspectives based on our history, who we are as characters. It's this, or as people. It's the same for characters. But you can push it all the way to a character who is unreliable either intentionally because they're trying to deceive. Gone Girl is a great example of an unreliable narrator who is intentionally manipulating. If you, that was a very popular book that spawned a film with Ben Affleck. Right, she's an intentionally unreliable character. She's manipulating, or it could be something like a girl on the train or Woman in the Window, which are two recent examples. And in Girl on Train, which I really liked that book. Why is she unreliable? Well, she's unreliable because why? She's an alcoholic. So she says, I didn't do it. I didn't do this murder, but she was blacked out from alcohol during the time of the murder. So do you trust her? Do you believe her? Well, she's unreliable, right? And so that's a really fun trope to play with. And first person obviously is most effective for unreliable narrator. The other big thing with first person is if you wish to write multiple point of view, not that you want to, but I've done it and I love it, although it makes your work a lot harder. First person can be limiting in the sense that you can do usually 2 points of view well in first person. I'm doing it right now, maybe 3, but anything beyond that can get really confusing for the reader, right? I did this, I went there, blah, blah, blah. Like a Game of Thrones would not work in first person. because there's like, I don't even know how many characters in a Game of Thrones. Each chapter in a Game of Thrones is the character, and we rotate through. But if it was all in first person, it would be a mess. The other thing is it puts a lot of burden on voice, on each character having a super distinctive voice. And that can get very disjointed and hard once we go beyond 2 or 3 characters. So if you wish to write multiple point of view, first person probably isn't your best option if you're going beyond 2 points of view. But Gone Girl, I mentioned, does it well in first, and I'm working on a book like that. But remember, Gone Girl is a deconstruction of a marriage at the core. It's looking at a story between a husband and a wife, and therefore that's part of why it's working that way. Okay, so your other big choice is third person. And I like to say there are 2 types of third person. There's third person omniscient, which you've definitely read books written this way. That's God's eye perspective, all-knowing narrator can go into the head of any character. This is your books written 100 years ago, your Charles Dickens. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Well, who was saying that, right? What I like to say with omniscient, it's not that you can't write in it. Of course, you can do anything you want, but it has fallen out of fashion in modern novel. In fact, writing in third person omniscient often will give your book or your story a more dated feel. Why? Because most contemporary writers aren't using it as much anymore. Plus, it can be harder to focus a story or have strong voice. But like I said, any book you've read from a certain amount of time ago or story was probably written in third omniscient. But remember, writing is an art form. It changes over time. What's stylistically in vogue, what is being explored shifts. It doesn't stay stagnant, right? And so this is worth noting. So right now, what you're seeing more of, which is what I love writing in, is third person close, or sometimes it's called third person limited. And this is most of what you're going to see nowadays. But I love it. It's this beautiful middle distance between first person and third omniscient. So we're coming over here. We're in third person, character name, he said, she said, they said. But we're still locked into one character's point of view. That's why it's called limited. Third limited. We're limited to one character's point of view. Again, anything they don't think, know, feel isn't on the page, much like first person. Or it's called third close. And I prefer that because I like to think about it as with first person, you're in their head, and third close, it's like you're perched on their shoulder. You're over here, kind of hovering. So you get a little more narrative distance with third close. So you're still only in one character's head. Only what they think and feel is on the page. But the nice thing is that we get their perspective and we get their strong perspective on the story. And we also get more narrative leeway in language to set scene description, tone, setting. This is where we can get a little fancier with how we write. We can cheat a bit more. It is much better and easier to do a lot of world building if there's a big burden on your book, which there might not be, or on your story. There might not be. This is what a Game of Thrones is written in, right? Where each chapter is in third close or third limited, and each chapter is a different character's point of view. You know, a Tyrion chapter, an Arya chapter, a Cersei Lannister chapter, and the book cycles through. So third person close is fantastic for multiple point of view narratives, if that's something you wish to write, or a multiple point of view type of story. This is what my Continuum Trilogy, my 13th Continuum Trilogy is written in. The first book has 2 big points of view and some smaller, but by the third book in the series, we're writing about 8 or 9 points of view. It will make your life harder. It will balloon your word count. And of course, you might not need this, or this might not be what interests you about the story. In that particular story, that is what interested me. Those books are about something destroys the surface of the earth, and humans live in different colonies. Some are underwater, some are underground, and some are in space, including a Mars colony. And humans go into exile for 1,000 years, and then they're supposed to return to the surface of the earth to recolonize. And the book really meditates on how each of these different worlds has evolved differently with different survival strategies, and then what happens when these different cultures start to try to come back together. And for me, that's what interested me about that story. But like I said, it might not be what you're interested in. You might say, hey, this isn't like what's drawing me. I don't need to worry about that. And that's totally fine. It's just worth taking into consideration. If you are doing something that requires a lot of world building, again, the epic genres, third person close or limited might be a better choice. But again, no hard rules, just what works best for your story. So Those are the big things you have to decide in the beginning, is whose story are we telling? And then what point of view do we want to use to tell their story? And that's where you're largely going between this first person and this third person. So some more notes on character. Yeah, go ahead. Ask any questions you want.
It just kind of, I know since you're doing like a bigger type of novel, does that get like confusing with like trying to tell the stories of different characters? And I mean, can some authors get like a little overwhelmed?
Yes. Well, why do you think George R. R. Martin hasn't finished his series? It's incredibly challenging, is what I would say. Yes, I was losing my mind a bit while writing the United Continuums. I'm not even going to lie. I mean, I think I pulled it off pretty well, but I had huge whiteboards with like plotting and stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think the upside is it's fun. It's really fun to be able to rotate through and get those fresh perspectives, and you can get nice cliffhangers off of it, and you can really explore a lot of elements of the world. But it can also be very overwhelming and a lot to pull off. And I think when we come into the end of a series, this is why I give J.K. Rowling so much credit for what she was able to do when you're trying to pay off all these character arcs, all these huge plot lines you set into motion, and do it in a way that's satisfying and feels authentic to the story. It's incredibly challenging. And at that point, you're also writing for readers, for readership who have expectations. You know?
And I'm thinking like people kind of got invested in like all the different characters and they want to know what happened to those characters.
Yeah, and let me tell you, when you start to kill off characters, people lose their minds.
So we had a question.
Yeah, I see it. How old were you when you really started having success as a writer? That's a great question. I had a whole first part of my life where I worked in Hollywood and worked as a film executive. I worked for a lot of A-list and big directors and movie studios. So I didn't actually start writing till I was 28. Seriously, especially with novel. I'd done here and there. I'd written screenplays. I was a film major in school. But I didn't really sit down and start learning how to write prose, which could be anything from short story to novel, until I was 28. And I'm self-taught. I taught myself. So there's a bit of a learning curve. But the first book I actually wrote did land me a big agent, a really big agent who had sold The Devil Wears Prada, a bunch of other stuff. And my first book was contemporary, but it didn't sell. And she warned me when she sold me. She was like, this is a very hard sell for publishers, because when we start to move into the business side, which is what success implies, it's a market, right? And things, so you could write the greatest book in existence, but if it's not what they're looking to buy and what they think they can sell, you're not going to get a book deal. And that's something I learned. There's being a great writer over here, which gets you in the door, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get all that big stuff. Like there's a lot of luck, timing, marketing, etc. But at the same time, I'd started writing the 13th Continuum when we were submitting my first book, which was my sci-fi epic. And that ended up selling in a 3-book deal, although it took a while to sell because I wanted it to be a trilogy. It was a little off center from what was in vogue in the market at the time, but I was committed to it, and it's held on. It's been cool. We're in a bunch of different languages. We're an audiobook. So that book series, I think I signed the deal when I was 34, published when I was first book when I was 35. So, the cool thing about writing is it's not as ageist as a lot of other industries that are creative can be. I'm sure you're familiar with acting or music industry. And I remember I'm actually really good friends with a famous comedian named Chevy Chase, who, it's a long story.
Cool.
Yeah, Chevy's, everyone's like, isn't he the biggest jerk in the world? And I understand him really well, and he loves me, and I won't get into all that here. But I remember telling him when I told my book, I was like, gosh, I just feel like I'm so old, I'm going to be 35 when it comes out. And Chevy looked at me, he goes, I didn't make it till I was 35. He's like, I was trying, I was doing stand-up, I was doing music. He didn't get on SNL started, he was 35 years old. Right. And he was like, and look at the career that he's had. He went from there to be in the 80s. He was the highest paid actor in Hollywood.
Yeah, I love Chevy Chase.
Me too. And my family watches Christmas Vacation every Christmas.
We do too.
Yeah, it's like my, and like it's really amazing, and I adore him. He's an older man now, of course, but I absolutely love him. But my point in saying that is that like he was like, I didn't make it, because doing this stuff, it tends to be a long path to success often. And a lot of times, yeah, of course, you hear about those big breakout younger people, but a lot of times they don't have sustained careers. There is some benefit to being a little bit older when things start to happen for you. And you've done all that hard work. And that's the thing, is you have to keep trying and trying, just like the characters in your story. And I always say you can't just think of it like one story or one book if you really want to have a career in it. you have to think, no, if the first one doesn't work, I know so many authors where it's their second book that sold, their fifth book, their 10th book, but then maybe they'll piggyback and sell some of those older books, or maybe not, it doesn't matter. But these are successful people. These aren't people who are unknown. And it took a lot. I think when I was hanging out with, what's his face, Andre Dubus, who wrote like The House of Sand and Fog, the third.
Hmm.
And his
Hmm.
father is like one of the most famous short story writers in history, American. So he had a leg up on the industry, same name as dad too. I was like, that's a leg up in publishing. If your dad's a really famous writer and you have the same name, that's already a leg up. And I asked him, I was like, hey, Andre, like, how many books did you write before you sold one? And he said, my fourth. I wrote 4 books, 3 didn't sell, or maybe it was his 5th. I don't know, before he sold. And he's like, this huge famous writer now. That tends to be really typical. I could tell you stories about Marlon James almost completely gave up on writing, burned every copy of his book before. And now he's won like the Man Booker Prize, and he's like Time Magazine 100 most influential people in the world. And I make fun of him for all of this. Like, you're so fancy now, Marlon. He's like this Jamaican guy, but he's amazing. He's amazing. So it is a war of attrition is the way I like to think about it. And just once you get successful, you're still getting rejected too. Like, you could still try to sell things and they don't sell. And then you're still having to like push through. I've been very fortunate to have a lot of things work for me, and Disney's been great for me. But I'm also just a huge fan of Disney. So it's like a dream job to be able to write their characters. So yeah, that's kind of how I am. I'm about to turn 42 years old, and I just finished my 11th book that will come out next summer, which is my Maleficent book for Disney Chills. So yeah, and I have other things that I'm working on and I hope to sell. And then my thing is I also take stuff and package it for film and television. So I have a whole slate in the works that we're trying to get to move forward. COVID kind of slowed that down because production shut down and everyone's at home and, kind of made it harder for a minute. But I think things are picking back up, which is exciting. Yeah, it's a great question though. But I don't think you're ever too old. One of my favorite books of all time is Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt. It's my favorite memoir of all time. And I think he didn't publish till he was like in his mid 50s, and he wrote one of the greatest books in existence, in my opinion. So that's one of the beautiful things about fiction and novels is there's not really an age on it, in my opinion. I think that it is something you can do and that you can also do throughout your life. Where it's not like, oh, you're too old for this, or you're not going to get cast in a movie anymore, or, it happens with musicians. It's not as, I guess say ageist is the way I think about it. I'm still excited for the new, whatever Cormac McCarthy will put out next, and he must be in his 80s. I love Stephen King. Boy, does he write a lot, and like, I'm not tired of him, and he's still excited. So yeah, that was a great question. Any other questions?
I have another question. Sorry, I keep asking questions.
No, I love it. I think it's so cool.
Curious. I'm just kind of curious, like, how do you come up with your ideas?
Oh yeah, that's a really interesting process. I do typically start from a spark of an idea and a what if. I do think I channel a bit for my work, but typically I'll just get a spark of something, or I'll want to do something. So Continuum was just this idea of like, I'm really obsessed with the deep seas and with underwater stuff. And I just had this idea during the BP oil spill when oil was coating the surface of the ocean. I was like, well, what if you couldn't live on the surface, but you had to go really deep to survive? And it sort of spun out of that. And it's a big influence is like Isaac Asimov's The Foundation series and other things, Lord of the Rings, and then different things. Spectre Deep 6 was sort of like, oh, this idea of I'm obsessed with flatliners, which is where they kill themselves and come back. But I always wanted to find a way to redo that. And I think I was watching a movie trailer about soldiers. I was like, oh, like what if it's like science though, where we can extend the window that we can resuscitate someone. So even if you've been dead a few days, we could bring you back as a ghost. And what if it's like this new way to tell a superhero story? And we just put these cool directors, the Dasani brothers, on who did like Evil Eye and Jin on Netflix and a bunch of cool stuff. But it's like Born Identity with ghosts. 200 was like, what if you could live forever, but you didn't want to? Like, what if you're like, I had enough time, 200 years is enough. Like, just let's do it. And it meditates on a marriage, sort of. So different stories come from different ideas. With Disney, for me, I go back to the original films and really try to figure out the core of the theme of what's going on with the villain. So like with Maleficent, I'm just like, yo, why is she so pissed off? Like, why did she curse this baby? And then I'm like, oh, she's mad because they didn't invite her to the party. That's literally what Maleficent's mad about. She has FOMO. She's like, you didn't invite me to this party. everyone else got invited to the party, and she shows up, crashes the party, and then puts a curse on the baby. I was like, well, that's what it's about. So I love children's books. I've drafted a few, but I don't know next steps, any tips, resources. By children's books, do you mean like more like picture books, or more like chapter books?
More like picture books.
Oh, okay. So picture books. So I will put a little asterisk on that, which I have not done picture books. Doesn't mean I won't ever do them. Actually, my Disney editor who left has been selling a bunch of these, and he's so talented. He loves his puns. Disney loves puns, puns, puns. So I've heard that you're supposed to not sell with an artist, that the publisher typically pairs you with an artist. And I know in picture books, it tends to be more the hand done stuff as opposed to graphic novels are more done on computers now, but hand drawn, but on computers. So I think you just write the book, the manuscript, and it's the same thing, query agents and have them submit to publishers, but without an artist. So I know they're fairly concept driven typically, like what is it about? And I think you probably, like anything, write it on spec, like you write the whole book, and it's probably broken by pages, I would imagine, for a picture book. And then for any big publishers to submit, you need an agent to represent you. They won't take typically unsolicited submissions, or you wouldn't get taken seriously. There might be smaller publishers where you can submit yourself, and that's not, again, I don't know the whole market for that. I do love picture books, and I think they're super fun and very in demand. So I would just say you probably have, you've drafted them. So you're probably at the stage where to get an agent, you would write a query letter and query agents, and you're going to want to find or look for agents that particularly represent picture books. And there are agencies that specialize in children's literature, where that's kind of their whole jam. And typically you want to find an agent. I usually look at comps, like go to the library, go to the bookstore, and look for books that are kind of in the vein of what you're doing, and then maybe try to find out who agented the book or who represented it. Typically authors always thank their agents in acknowledgments, so you can always look to see if they have that. I don't know if they do that as much in picture books. And then there's also something called the SCWBI, the children's, I can't remember all the things, but it's like there is a group for children's writers and picture book writers. It's like SC, Southern Children's Picture, but I would say definitely join them. They do conferences. It's always good to go to those, and it's good networking to meet other writers. I think it's called I can't ever remember the thing. I'm not a member, but I've been told to join many times. Something like that. But it's like
Thank
a group.
you.
Yeah, and I think they probably have more resources than even I could tell you. Like I said, I do know folks that do this stuff, but it's not been, and I've been to conferences. Like there's also I think that's called, I don't know if this is going on right now, Billy Sir Children's Writing Conference. I did go one year. It's run by an agency that reps a lot of this stuff, and it's like a weekend in Big Sur. Again, I don't know what's going on because a lot of the in-person stuff isn't happening, but there were a lot of picture book folks there. I was there more for middle grade YA, but very cool. Anyone else have questions?
I think Gladys had a question too about writer's block.
Oh, yeah, writer's block. Oh, yeah, this is one of my favorite ones to talk about. So I think what most people think writer's block isn't actually what writer's block is. So I think a lot of people think, I've thought about this really deeply. I think a lot of people think writer's block is looking at a blank page and having no ideas. But I don't think that's writer's block at all, at least not in my experience. Writer's block is actually perfectionism. So basically what happens is you typically have a lot of ideas or an idea you're really excited about, but the bright and shiny idea in your head is so great and so perfect that in order to write it, you have to write the bad version of it, right? We call this like the shitty first draft. That's literally what we call it. The shitty first draft. That's literally the industry term. And what that means is like no writer in existence doesn't revise, doesn't have to do this. So we basically write what is the shitty first draft, the bad short book, the bad version of the story. So the perfectionism keeps us from writing because we're afraid in writing it, we're going to write something bad, right? But the weird thing is you actually have to write the bad version to get to the good version, right? A first draft, if you're doing anything, that's why I talked about character and voice today. If you can lay in good voice and character and lay in a good structure to the story, That's the biggest thing you can do in a first draft. Then we go into revision, and no writer doesn't revise. We all revise on our own. And then once we move into professional, your agent's going to give you notes. My editor does a whole editorial letter and line edits on all my books. There is no writer, no matter how good, that doesn't go through revision. So we take the bad version and then we make it better. And if you've ever written something, could even just be an email and then redrafted it, you know what I'm talking about, how it gets better when you work on it. But you kind of have to write the bad version before you can get to the good version. So I always say the way writer's block works is it's this perfectionism, but when you actually start writing is when your fear of not writing overwhelms your fear of writing something bad, you actually write. So yeah, there's a lot of anxiety involved in writing. So you kind of just like, I try to trick myself a lot where I'll be like, oh, well, just write a sentence or just write a page or just write a paragraph, because anyone can do that, right? Like that's nothing. And I always tell myself, and then if you hate it or it's bad, you can take a break. And typically once I get myself writing, I'll write a lot more than I trick myself into writing. And I find it's hardest starting. The starting is the hardest, and maybe the first beginning. And plus, there's a lot of work you have to do in the beginning to set the story. Once I'm in the flow of something, then I'm super good, and that kind of goes away. Which is why I kind of do recommend when you're first drafting, writing a little bit every day. And again, even if it's just a paragraph, totally fine, because it keeps your head in the story. The other thing you can do is if you're kind of like doing that thing where you're being really negative, I'm the worst writer in existence, I'm terrible. We all have this. Even when you get successful, everyone's going to hate your next book. You'll never sell anything again, kind of stuff. Either make it be quiet or just be like, I'll fix it in revision. I just like tell that voice. I'm like, I know it's not good right now. I'll fix it in revision. I'll fix it in revision, and just keep writing and just tell yourself you'll fix it later. You'll fix it later, and just keep writing, because until we draft something and get that, we can't really do anything with it. You kind of have to get it out and get the bad version out in order to even have something that you can work on to make better. So that's sort of like my thoughts on writer's block. I think it's something that we grapple with at all stages of trying to be a writer. It's just part of the process. So whatever you can do to get yourself writing, to trick yourself into writing, sometimes setting a timer and being like, I'll just write for 15 minutes. By the way, you can do a lot if you write every day for 15 minutes, and then that's it. Just giving yourself permission. There's an excerpt I teach from Danny Shapiro's craft book, Still Writing, which is called Permission, about giving yourself permission to be a writer and to write. And I almost always close the first class of all my 5-week workshops with reading this excerpt, which is just about giving yourself permission to be a writer and not getting hung up on, you know, whether or not anyone else thinks you're good enough or what the world will think. Because all that matters to be a writer, all you have to do to be a writer is you just have to write. That's it. If you write, you're a writer. It doesn't matter anything else. Being an author, being published, that's something else. Being a writer is just someone who writes. Yeah, this is a great question, though. Yeah, Gladys, this is a great question. And like I said, like we all grapple with it. I'm, you know, coming off whatever book. I have to start working on a script I'm drafting with a director right now because I want to make a motorcycle racing movie. And even I'm like, and I already wrote like the first act, and he just wrote 10 pages sent back. And even I'm like freaking out a little bit, like, what if what I write is not good? Like what? And I have to go watch Rocky tonight because he wants it to be like Rocky. And I'm like, okay, I guess I had to rewatch Rocky. That's my life. But then like I'm all freaked out. But once I start writing, I know it'll be fine. But I get all insecure, like, what if what I write's not good? And like, you know, we all have days, like I have days where I'm like, God, I'm the best writer ever. God, I'm rocking and rolling. And the next day I might feel like I'm the worst writer ever. So that's just normal. It's like, you know, how you have good and bad days as a human. Well, we have good and bad days at our jobs, good and bad days trying to write. So
I think she asked you one more question on here.
Where is your next signing? I know the next thing. Oh, so I'm doing a virtual event with Serena Valentino. Here, let me look at my calendar. So Serena Valentino is the best-selling author of the Disney Villains series, and we're doing something. She has a new book called Cold Hearted coming out. With the Cinderella villain, I believe. And
Cool.
yeah, it looks so good. I think it's called Cold Hearted, and that's coming out. So I'm doing something in July where Serena and I are appearing together. Let me take a look. It's July 15th at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and that's going to be a virtual event for Mysterious Galaxy in San Diego. And so my social media, I'm Jennifer Brody on Twitter and Jennifer Brody Writer on Instagram. And you can probably find Serena because they just released her book tour info. So I'm doing this one appearance with her, and that should be a lot of Disney villains talk, but fun. And Serena's amazing, super talented writer. And that'll be virtual, so that's very easy. And then my first in-person, I think I'm doing something, my Hades book comes out in August. I think August 15th, I'll be appearing at Midsummer Scream, which is a horror festival in Los Angeles, and I'll be doing a panel and a signing for Dark Delicacies. And I think we're still finalizing the time, but it should be the weekend of August 14th to 15th. It's a big horror festival thing. And so I'm appearing, I think, on the 15th. And that's the first time I'm doing anything in person. So that's what I have coming up. And then I also teach writing classes for the writing pad. So I'm teaching an intro to novel now. So the next classes will probably be in the late summer or fall. Yeah, that's a great question. Anything else? I love answering questions. I'm like such a nerd for writing and I love it. So I just love talking about it.
I have one last one. How long does it normally take you to like go from beginning to end of the novel and then your revisions and all of that?
It really depends. I am a relatively fast writer. For my own books, are the big sci-fi ones. So those drafts tend to come in closer to like 150,000 words. Yeah, I hate my life, and I'm trying to do better with that too. And they tend to be 100,000 word plus books. Those take me a lot longer because, and typically I'm tackling multiple points of view, big world build, big storytelling. I think 13th Continuum probably took me a year to draft the first draft, but it came in super long. And then I cut it down to like 120,000 words, and it published around 105,000. So that took me a little longer typically, or like the one I'm working on now has been put on hold on and off for reasons involving that it's about Space Force, but I was writing it before Donald Trump created Space Force because I was like, who cares about proxy wars in space? But I was writing about someone who goes basic training in space. So then I had to kind of put it on hold to let the world catch up while writing sci-fi and kind of like let all the things happen for my world build. And then also with Disney, I've been on and off, but it's drafted. I just need to finish the revision. But it can take longer. And for my own stuff, when I'm not hitting a deadline, I have the luxury of taking longer. But for Disney, the deadlines have been absolutely crazy. I typically draft those in 4 weeks. I will have done. So usually we start with an idea or a villain. I'll pitch my editor my idea. And starting with the third book, they're all my completely original stories and breaks. And then I'll typically write a treatment because I have to go through brand management to get approval because these are canon. And then, and they are usually pretty cool. And then I'll typically write a very detailed outline though, partially because I don't have time to do developmental edits at that type of deadline. And also to make sure we're all on the same page. And that's a chapter by chapter breakdown, which tends to hold. I'm very good at structure typically. And then once my editor gives me the go ahead, usually I'm drafting those in 4 weeks. It's crazy. That means I'm writing a chapter a day, basically every day, chapter a day. And and then I'm waiting for my editor to hit me back. Usually my revisions take about 2 to 3 weeks, but usually I can do them pretty fast. I am pretty good at this. So actually, honestly, one of the best things is that usually they're pretty minimal what I have to do. When you're in trouble is when you have to do developmental completely reworking. Typically these tend to be minor kind of, and it is elevating, but it's more polishy. Disney gets basically first drafts from me. I don't have time to read through the whole book even before I send them in. And then the revise, I just go through. But I mean, the good news is like they're sitting 4.5, every book's at 5 stars on Amazon, hundreds of reviews, and like they are really cool, I think. So, but I don't think I could have done that at an earlier stage of my career. After, going through writing other books, I had learned how to do this pretty well. So I am just kind of able to write for the most part. But I do a lot of work ahead of time with making sure I break and I'm really into structure, put a good structure into the story. And then one of the big things I try to do is I'm really big on character, on having good themes, crafting relatable characters, really trying to make them 3-dimensional and really so they're not just surface, like we're really getting something deeper than, you might normally expect in a middle grade book. So I try to really elevate them to the best I can. So, and I love it. It's super fun. But those deadlines can be a little crushing and punishing.
Yeah.
I have that we're spacing the series more, so I'm going to have more time. Because we're going to 1 a year. I had 3 out this year, which is nuts. So we're going to a 1 a year schedule, which is going to give me more room to work more on my other stuff that I have going on, to write some other new things. So yeah.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, don't feel bad if it takes a long time. It can take, I mean, I know people where it's taken them like years to write a great book. It can take a lot of time. It's okay. And life sometimes interferes, and gets in there. So
yeah, cool. Any other questions?
Yeah, any other questions?
Well, we would definitely love to have you back in some form in the fall.
Yeah,
I did have phone calls about you, so that'd be great.
Yeah, maybe even in person, I can like come hang out and sign books and
I'm
stuff.
sure that will be by then. Yeah, that'd be cool.
But yeah, I'd love to come back. You're awesome. I love libraries. I love talking to readers. And yeah, like I said, there's been a lot of interest with the Disney series. Has really kind of gotten pretty popular. We're in so many different countries. It's really fun. It's all over the world now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on with us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. And I'll be in touch too.
Please, absolutely. And thanks, Gladys. Thanks, Ariana. It was really nice. You guys had awesome questions, and happy writing. Good luck with your stuff.
Thank you. And thank you guys. Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in.
Bye.